Good afternoon and a very warm welcome everyone to this online event on election monitoring organized by the European Policy Center and dedicated to nationwide elections that took place in Italy yesterday and that were triggered by the premature fall of Mario Draghi's technocratic government. In yesterday's election, the far-right coalition, according to the latest polls, led by Giorgia Meloni's Brothers of Italy, has scored a decisive victory, reaching over 44% of votes in the rate for the Senate and over 130 seats in both the Senate and the Chamber of Deputies. So according to many, the results of Italy's snap elections put it in the position to form the country's first government led by the far-right coalition since the Second World War. And to make sense of yesterday's votes and its consequences for both Italy and Europe, I'm pleased to have here with us today Michele Barbero, who is editor-in-chief of AFPTV and contributor to Foreign Policy, where he publishes and writes about Italian and international politics. And also Manuela Caiani, who is associate professor in political science at the Scuola Normale Superiore, and who has written extensively on far-right and populism, and who should reach us shortly. So I would like to thank you, Michele, for being here today, to find the time to be with us today and to talk us and guide us through the outcome of the elections. So what this will mean for Europe, for Italy, and for the broader political scenario.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm deputy head of AFPTV Live, just to rectify it slightly. I'm not as important, I'm afraid.
Apologies. And the structure of this event is the following. I will first hear from you, from our panelists. We have 4 or 5 questions, and then we will turn to questions from the audience. And I wish to invite those who want to raise a questions to write it in the Q&A box, not in the chat box, the Q&A box, or to raise their hands virtually and wait for me to give them the floor. So without further ado, I would like to begin with the first questions, and I would like to pose it to Manuela Caiani, who I see now is joining us. And the first question is about Giorgia Meloni's recent interview, in which she has declared that her victory would be a victory for the benefit of Italy, and that voting for her would mean voting against Brussels. So on this background, I would like to ask you, who is Giorgia Meloni, what this position stands for, and what is Brothers of Italy, her party? What does the party stand for, and who it represents? I know it's a broad question, but yeah.
Okay, thank you, Tommaso, Grossi, and thank you for the invitation to this important event in which we try to make sense and to also to organize a bit of information that we know about these political forces and their political programs, and we try to figure out some possible future scenarios for Italy. And so your question is very big, so probably there is not time to address all the specificities and details of this very big question. We can start by trying to locate Fratelli d'Italia party within the radical right European party family, which is a category of political parties that we have seen very successful in the recent years, not only in Italy, but in many other countries. radical right party of Giorgia Meloni, as you know, differs from the typical populist radical right party. Giorgia Meloni and Fratelli d'Italia comes directly from the heritage of the old fascist party in Italy, although the party has tried to normalize also its image vis-à-vis the electors. However, this heritage is strong, especially in the social milieus of the party. And therefore, the first observation we can raise is about the unitarian image of the party. So a possible also contradictions that the party will probably will be forced to deal with in the near future. On the one hand, there is a party which have tried to normalize and also legitimize its presence in the Italian political system. On the other hand, there is a root of the party which is especially likely at the local level, and it is lively and also very much, let me say, populated at the local level, which is the reality and the identities and the frames of the social base of this party, which are not always in harmony, let's say, with a total, I don't want to say denial, but total detachment from the fascist past. And this, I think, will be also the challenge for this party. Now, this party has a bit a very important parliamentary position, and it will have a very important governmental position. The exceptionality, of course, of this situation, the exceptionality of Italy is already in the pages of most of the international journals, newspapers. And therefore, now I think for the party, very challenging would be how to compose the internal sectors and the social basis with the new institutional responsibilities. We have already seen, and here I come back to your reference to the Giorgia Meloni interview. We have already seen during this political campaign Giorgia Meloni trying to reassure what the market, the external investors, but also the European Union. So Giorgia Meloni also took some distances from other radical right or right-wing populist European leaders in the past few weeks. Although these leaders, we know, have been the first ones this morning to be happy and to raise their congrats to Giorgia Meloni and Fratelli d'Italia. So the point is, let's see how Giorgia Meloni and Fratelli d'Italia will manage to keep, on the one hand, the inside of the party, the political party, in a way which is consistent and not under the risk of splintering or fight, internal fighting. And on the other hand, how Giorgia Meloni will manage to combine an international role, and in particular an European important role of Italy, and the need to not to compromise too much, and not to somehow to make the discontent to increase in the electors who voted for the party. So I think it will be a very important triangulation, not easy at all for our party. Yeah.
Thank you for your answer. I was told in the Q&A box that there seems to be an echo, and probably it's due because of Michele Barbero's microphone was open, but it was not. So So I don't know, Professor, if you can.
Yeah, I muted myself at some point,
okay.
but it didn't affect the problem, unfortunately.
I can hear you both well, so I hope yeah, it's not too big of an issue. So jumping back to the questions I just asked to Professor Caiani, I wanted to ask to Michele Barbero also to explain maybe this normalization and also to comment on the fact that, as we were discussing earlier, it's not as much as a victory of the coalition, which of course scored a very important victory, but it's a victory of Giorgia Meloni and her party in the first place. What do you think of this analysis?
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Yeah, I found Manuela's words about differences between leadership and base quite interesting. And it is true that there is, of course, a fairly militant base that's probably more to the right than the way Meloni is at least trying to portray herself. Let me just point out, though, that it's there's also a class of politicians that ran with Meloni's party now, which are not new at all. I think one of the successes of Meloni was to portray herself as the new, as a political force that never dirtied their hands with the business of government. But when you look at who's actually running for Fratelli d'Italia, there's literally people from not only from the Berlusconi's years, but even from the old DC, from the old Democrazia Cristiana, Gianfranco Rotondi, to mention one, right? And so this was it's interesting that she is trying to both sanitize her image, as Manuela said, and at the same time, though, to present herself as new. It's a double gamble that was not necessarily that easy to pull off, and she clearly managed to. And the fact that she succeeded to this extent, the extent of her success is visible, as you were referring to, Tommaso, to the fact that this is not a right-wing coalition win. This is essentially a Meloni win, and the balance is the balance of power within this coalition will be tricky, to say the least, in the sense that one of the big losers of this election is in fact Matteo Salvini and his League party, who's lost to Meloni. If you look at the votes they received in the proportional part of the electoral system, who have lost to Meloni in their bastions, even in the north, in Lombardy, in Veneto, in regions that the League has governed for ages. And so all this to say, I would also be slightly cautious about thinking that this will be an easy peasy right-wing government for the next 5 years, in the sense that I am pretty sure that even before this score, neither Berlusconi nor Salvini, the two main allies of Meloni's, were particularly happy to hand her the reins, for a variety of reasons, some substantial, some less substantial. I'm personally convinced that a healthy, not healthy, like a very unhealthy dose of sexism was also there. But I would not be surprised at all if this coalition started showing some cracks, because it wouldn't be the first time we see Salvini in government, technically speaking, but in fact sniping at his allies from government, trying to be at the same time a league of government and a league of protest somewhat. And in fact, we've already seen this during the campaign, where Salvini was definitely not a great team player, right? He actually, there were moments where I believe Meloni has even said that herself, like on TV during the campaign. I feel like Salvini is attacking more me than the left. So we'll see what happens over the next few years, or maybe just over the next few months.
Yes, can I, Tommaso, of course,
Please.
lead the interview. I would like to build, elaborate also a bit more on the important comments that Michele Barbero just made on this point concerning Meloni presenting herself, but also the party as a sort of outsider and not compromised with the other politicians in Italy. Can I build on that?
Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So now I think what has been said, it is very important, and I would like to reflect on these two points. On the one hand, I said that, of course, Fratelli d'Italia is characterizable as a typical radical right party, more than a right-wing populist party. At the same time, this is not totally true. I mean, also Giorgia Meloni played the card of the new novelty. So she played also the card of the typical rhetoric of populist parties, which is made basically on 3 points. Now the appeal to the people, the insistence of the appeal on the people, conceptualized as an homogeneous body without any distinctions. And Giorgia Meloni, when she said that the benefits, the vote of today is beneficial to Italy somehow. So the appeal to the homogeneous people, the anti-elitist somehow appeal, which it is important to remind that also for populists in power, then it is very critical point, because how to manage this constant appeal anti-elitist or somehow anti the traditional other, the mainstream, with a governmental role and position. But we saw also politicians that have been managed that quite rhetorically, but quite successfully, as Trump, also in the first discourse, the first meeting of the Congress. So just after won the election, Trump was keeping on this anti-elitist appeal, so quite surprisingly. By the way, the third point is about this charismatic leadership. So I would say that probably one of the key of success of Meloni was, on the one hand, to build on this past, which probably is still on the as we said, in terms of social basis, is still an appeal for part of the Italian voters, but also she used quite skillfully, I would say, this idea of outsiderness in a double sense. Outsider as a political party not yet compromised with the mainstream parties, although, as correctly has been said, now part of the staff and part of the actors will be not new at all, but also outsider in sense of a woman, so a woman in the leadership role within a man environment, as it is still the environment of party politics in Italy and the Italian political system. And therefore, Meloni was very successful in playing this double outsiderness. At the same time, in terms of anti-elitism, I want just to mention very briefly some data. If we look at the Eurobarometer and the satisfaction with democracy and democracy in Italy data from 2005 to 2021, we see that this dissatisfaction with democracy, as well as the distrust toward the parliament, toward Italy, toward the government, and both parties, had increased in Italy since 2005 until 2018, last election, and 2021. So, for instance, just to mention the distrust in political parties, it is at around 80%. 80% of Italians tend not to trust. More than 50% of Italians tend not to, in 2021, tend not to be totally satisfied. And all these data combined with the voters turnout in national elections that we know in this occasion has been, the voters turnout has been particularly low, around 64. In 2008 it was 73. Before, in 2014 election, European was 75. So if we combine all these data with the political discourse of Meloni, probably we understand something also, an additional piece of the puzzle to understand the great success of this party and this leader. but also at the same time, perhaps we have some aspects on which to reflect for possible difficulties in the future. One among the others, of course, is the coalition. Of course, not only internal difficulties, but also the external ones, not together with the other parties. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a very interesting data that you also mentioned about the Eurobarometer's data on dissatisfaction, which makes me think about the second question I wanted to ask, which is about Ursula von der Leyen's recent words on when she stated that the EU, although willing to cooperate with any democratically elected government, still has the tools to prevent Italy to go in a certain way, which is probably something that would explain also the clashes, let's put it that way, between the electorate and what Europe stands for and represents. So do you think that, and maybe I'll ask the question first to Michele Barbero, that there will be a clash of beliefs, to put it simply, between what the far-right coalition, what Fratelli d'Italia stands for, and what Europe stands for? Or do you think that there will be a compromise will be reached on many important files, also given that, as you were mentioning at the beginning of the call, that there is important sectors of the coalition and in Brothers of Italy that come from more institutional background and that had actually important positions in Europe. I'm thinking of Caiani, for instance, but I'm sure there are many more.
Yeah, I mean, I think von der Leyen essentially misspoke, or at least poorly chose her timing, and she's not the only one in Europe who's done so. Like the French PM, I believe, this morning talked about, we're going to be keeping an eye on abortion rights in Italy, which, of course, on the subject of the matter, absolutely fair enough. Not sure that's the best comment to make on day one following the elections. I would say when it comes to Euroscepticism, the EU, I mean, I happen to be fairly optimistic in the sense that I think a lot of Meloni's words and Meloni's Euroscepticism, which has been massively toned down, by the way, over the past few months and years, that's propaganda. I think she will grow up soon. She will learn pretty quickly, and I think, in fact, she already knows that when it comes to the EU right now, we just need the recovery fund money. There is only so much you can do to readjust slightly, perhaps. I mean, she's actually openly said, we want to slightly change the agreement with Brussels to spend the money slightly differently in agreement with Brussels. Well, good luck with that. This wouldn't be the first time that you got a massively Eurosceptic populist party taking the reins in Rome on a platform largely based on, we're going to renegotiate every single spending parameter on budget, government deficit, and so forth with Brussels, and then not much really happens. We all remember what happened with the Salvini and Five Star Movement government, right, which promised all sorts of things in this respect, and they essentially came home empty-handed. And in fact, government debt did not skyrocket under that government. So I believe that while for sure the relationship between Rome and Brussels would be more rocky than under Draghi, who's a man of the EU institutions, effectively speaking, there will not be. It's in no one's interest to seek a head-on confrontation. And I think at the end of the day, despite the bickering that certainly will be dialed up compared to the standards we got used under Draghi, on the fundamental stuff, the Italian government will basically go along with the program when it comes to recovery fund and not going crazy on spending. That said, some worries are justified in the sense that this is not a particularly fiscally conservative rights. If you look at the programs of Meloni's and even the joint program of the coalition, it's a long list of new handouts, new benefits, beefed up existing handouts, tax cuts. It's an extremely expensive program. I do think, though, that most analysts do believe that this program will be massively watered down when it comes to actually the actual government action. That said, as I was saying, some worries about the markets going ballistic and kicking off a dangerous speculation cycle are always there. Let's not forget that the last purely right-wing government in Italy was Berlusconi's, which in 2011 was forced to quit under a massive wave of speculation that basically brought Italy to the brink of bankruptcy. So I'm cautiously optimistic, essentially, about the whole system holding up somewhat, but there will be for sure confrontations and tensions, both political and financial.
Thank you. I will now like to give the floor to Manuela Caiani, although I'm told in the Q&A box that the audio is still a bit, there's a bit of an echo, so maybe I can suggest you to unplug your headphones. I don't know if that is going to help, but we can try. Otherwise, I personally can hear you well, so maybe has to do with the connection overall.
Thank you, Tommaso.
I just wanted to maybe expand also on what Michele just said, to also hear your opinion on EU-Italy's relations in the light of this victory.
Yes, I agree on what has been just said by the other speaker. At the same time, I would like to problematize a bit for what it can mean, relationship between Italy and Europe. Instrumentally, I'm also sure that probably our new Italian government will find a compromise with Europe. Instrumentally, as we said, we need the money of the recovery fund. We need to not to lose too much by our possible radicalized position, let's say, vis-à-vis Europe. At the same time, it is important to reflect on the fact that currently what we notice in political science and sociology, there is a development of European identities also on the right. And this is very well visible not only at the level of social movements, so on the street, but also at the level of political parties. So what it was quite unthinkable, like 5-10 years ago, so this agreement, let me say, transnationalization of radical right forces, now is something which is increasingly happening, and we can also see, I mean, this was under our eyes when we saw in the last month, but also 1 year or more, the good relationships that also Giorgia Meloni has been able to establish with other right-wing leaders in other countries, Vox in Spain and many others, but also the networks of contact that Fratelli d'Italia have been able to establish with association, conservative association, and social movements in the other countries, in other European countries, working on values, conservative values, and law and order, and family, and so on and so forth. So what I want to say here is that on the one hand, there is a development of strong European identities also on the radical right. European identities, however, which frame in a peculiar kind of way the type of Europe they want. So if until recently this transnationalization of the radical right was unthinkable because of the core value of nationalism and therefore immigration, xenophobia, which was there. Now we can still remember the difficulties which radical right parties have found in the past in forming a European group and then a European party. We can also remind the fight that we had between the Romanian Radical Right Party and Alessandro Mussolini, which stigmatized them with with the racist words. So currently, this problem, this contradiction is disappearing on the name of what? Of a peculiar type of Europe, an exclusionary vision of Europe, I would say. Which not only which goes beyond the Europe nations, but had something more. It is a Christian Europe which unifies also these right-wing, extreme right forces around the idea of Europe as Christianity, has a certain type of core values, and which differentiates Europe mainly with against, let me say, Islam and therefore some sectors of possible immigrants. And therefore this is something important because in terms of framing, even if we will not probably do anything radical in terms of our participation and membership in Europe, it will be interesting to notice which kind of political discourse will be raised and communicated and constructed around Europe. Which kind of vision of Europe will be propagated in the political elite discourse in the next few years. Because as we know, of course, that from sociological and political science research, political discourses have a strong impact also on the way people cognitively and also emotionally understand a political actor, a political institution. It also has an impact in terms of content of the politics and the polity and the policies that within these institutions then are run and are considered legitimate also by citizens. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I pick up on that just very briefly?
Please, Michele, go ahead.
Thank you. No, that what Manuela said is very interesting, and I'm sure she's just talking about a deeper phenomenon. But I just wanted to add the fact that I think COVID and the way the EU reacted to COVID and pulled together, and to some extent also the Ukraine crisis perhaps, has made I think harder to be head-on anti-European. You've seen that very clearly in Italy, right, where Meloni, just a few years ago, she was saying that Brussels was robbing us of our resources. It's very hard to claim that when we're when we're receiving 200 billion euros from Brussels. Part of it is our own money, fair enough, but still, the reasoning still stands. And perhaps interestingly, Euroscepticism has morphed even in the most traditionally Eurosceptic parties like the League or Meloni. It's gone from we need to get out of the Eurozone, we need to get out of the EU, to we want Europe, but a different Europe. And that's what they are essentially saying right now.
Thank you, Michele. Yes, I think I mean I agree with both analysis. But I guess now my question is if their attitude towards Europe has changed. Has it to do also with Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the rising energy prices? Do you think it has to do mostly because it was very difficult to position oneself differently in the aftermath of Russia's invasion of Ukraine? could also that have contributed to the fact that they now are less Eurosceptic and more aligned towards EU and US values, for instance?
Is that for me?
I'm asking both. Maybe Michele, you go first.
Yeah, I mean,
then I will ask to. I think
I'm not sure I have an answer in the sense that I think with respect to what I was saying just earlier, I think COVID was way more important than the Ukraine crisis, in the sense that I think the Ukraine crisis, that issue, that war has been framed in Italy more in terms of where do we stand on the US versus Russia spectrum, which is, by the way, a fairer way of framing this, because the EU doesn't matter that much militarily when it comes to this war. It's way more important whether you are like staunchly transatlanticist or you're flirting with Russia. Yeah, in this sense, I would say the war in Ukraine has played a role up to an extent in the campaign, in the sense that I don't believe many people voted based on that, based on the relationship with Russia and the ties, alleged or real, of some right-wing parties with Russia. This is one of the mistakes, I believe, of the center left, which is, this is one of the issues on which the left pounded the rise, and turned out it was one of the many issues they insisted on, that on which they were not in line with what the real people actually care about. Of course, Ukraine has a direct impact on the energy prices, and that's very much, that one is a very important high up issue on people's agendas. But I would say this is not, first of all, this is not something that's been talked about that much in the campaign, given how, if one considers how relevant this is for people, for voters. But I suspect the reason is that, in fact, there aren't massive differences, ideological differences, practical answers to this problem. This is not something that fundamentally divides the right from the left. So that's also perhaps another reason why I would say the war in Ukraine has had a relatively limited impact, I would say, on this campaign.
Thank you, Michele. I will ask now the same questions to Manuela Caiani. So
yes, I really align totally with the comment just raised. So I did not have to add much more this time. Yes, I also think that the voters didn't vote on this issue, on the Ukrainian war issue. It was not so salient. Also, according to yes, also what we can see from the first analysis of the political discourse of the several leaders and political parties in Italy during the campaign, this issue had some peaks of attention, but it was not so salient. Another just a brief comment on what came in my mind while Michele was discussing about the left and right and the ability to capitalize on some issues. There has been an interesting study recently who analyzed an incredible number of social media posts and sentences of different kinds, so from TikTok to Facebook and Telegram, Instagram, and this study, so drawing on a large amount of data, which has been then analyzed with formalized technique of content analysis. This study tried to compare what have been the issues of the left-wing leaders during the political campaigns, the main recurring wars, the issues, and what have been the issues, the main recurring ones in the voters, especially the young voters. And so now we're talking about the left side and not the other side. And the first result was a clear disalignment between those issues, standing at the core of youth discussions and interest during this month of campaigns, and those issues mobilized by the left-wing coalition, the left-wing party, political party. So this, I don't know, let's interpret this just as a curiosity, no? Which can add an extra key of interpretation of the failure of the center-left coalition. Yeah.
Thank you. Since you mentioned the center-left coalition, I wanted to also maybe ask you questions about as you were saying, the shortcomings and limitations of the center-left to raise a serious answer to the rise of far-right parties across Europe. I'm also thinking of Michele's articles, was recently published on foreign policy, I think, in which he was trying to assess the state of Enrico Letta's Democratic Party. So what was the limit of the left in this campaign to present itself as a serious alternative? Michele, do you want to say something about that?
Sure. I would say both Italy-specific issues and broader issues concerning the center-left mainstream parties in the Western world, right? Like, broadly speaking, I'm sure Manuela Caiani will know this much better than me, but we've seen mainstream social democratic left-wing parties essentially losing voters in many Western countries. France being a clear example. And that's essentially because, certainly in Italy, this was also the case. It's because the left, these parties kind of flirted with globalization in a way that alienated many core voters of the left, many working class voters of the left. In Italy, it was Mr. Renzi's leadership that it's under Renzi in, let's say, 2015, 2016, particularly, that the PD, the Democratic Party, kind of took a somewhat pro-business, if not straight up neoliberal turn, the infamous Jobs Act that was never forgiven by many on the left, effectively, reduced job security for many. So many of these votes, left over the past few years and never came back. Let's not forget that about 50% of factory workers, just to give a figure, in Italy, vote for the far right, essentially, Brothers of Italy or the League. That's according to a pre-election poll, I should say. And then, specifically speaking, when it comes to Italy, the problem is that the PD, the Democratic Party, the main center-left party, was perceived even more than others as a party of government, a part of the establishment, a party that governed for 10 out of 11 years over the past 11 years. And so I don't think there was much that any leader could have done in a context where there's a very strong anti-political feeling in general that's found different expressions, the 5-Star Movement, for example, a few years back. And in this context, finding yourself as the party of government by definition versus the Brothers of Italy, who actually managed to portray themselves as the only ones left untouched by the dirty business of government, that did the trick. That's in a nutshell why the Democratic Party lost and lost badly.
Thank you, Michele. Before commenting on that, I think Professor Caiani has to leave. So I wanted to thank her for her time, for being here with us today and give us some more guidance through the elections that happened yesterday. Thank you very much. Michele,
thank you very much for the invitation, and also as an idea, could be also very interesting to re-update in 3 or 6 months to have another discussion on this populist, perhaps, party in government, to see how they manage the party and the coalition, the many contradictions or possible challenges that we have illustrated so far. So thank you, Tommaso, and thank you to all the organizers for this very interesting discussion.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, Michele.
Take care. Bye.
So, Michele, if you have 10, 15, even 20 more minutes, I'd say, I don't want to take too much of your time, maybe we can go through two of the questions that were raised in the Q&A box. And the first one being, could you explain why the Italian center-right ended up to be represented only by Berlusconi? Is this a reaction to a somewhat overleaning of Italians to parties of the left in the past that did not deliver? I think you partially responded to that questions, but if you want to expand it, please.
Yeah, I mean, I would say what I was talking about, center-left mainstream parties, losing ground also applies to mainstream conservative parties, like all over Europe, of course, and Berlusconi's party is, technically speaking, one of those. That said, Italy has a specific context. Italy is a place where the entire party system collapsed in the early 90s, right? And this led to essentially the rise of new parties. And Forza Italia was born in the 90s, and this in turn leads to a high rate of personalization of parties. This may be because Italians particularly like, compared to other countries, to have what they perceive as a strong, charismatic leader, and then they abandon them whenever they don't deliver. We've seen that with multiple in multiple cases. Monti, then Renzi, then Salvini. But in general, the high level of personalization of Italian politics has to do with what I was saying, that our entire party system had to be recreated from scratch, essentially, or at least to some extent in the 90s. This means that if the leader is unable to create a hair, or to create a milieu of politicians or political figures that can replace their leadership, and is unable to create a structure on the ground, then whenever that leader kind of grows older and so forth, there's no one left to replace him. And I'm not sure our international audience fully grasps how crazy some of the comments made by Berlusconi were during this campaign. Setting aside the content, he really gave the impression of having become a caricature of himself. And so, if anything, it's impressive that he still managed to get some 7-8% of the vote. But in a nutshell, this is, I would say, one of the main reasons why Forza Italia is this weak. Berlusconi was always the leader, the synonymous to Forza Italia. He was the party. So as he grows older and is increasingly sidelined, he's the only one who was representing the moderates, let's say, and he's playing a less and less important role.
Yeah, and it's striking to see that even his latest declarations on Putin and the war didn't really seem to affect his credibility, which is...
Yeah, I would say his credibility was already low. It was already so low that it did not impact anything, and if anything, he actually got slightly more than some were expecting. But his entire campaign was based on meaningless videos on TikTok, very, very light on content. His proposals are essentially the same ones that he's been giving for 20-30 years now, right? And which he never actually managed to implement, raising pensions, raising salaries, and so forth.
Thank you, Michele. And maybe two more questions. The first one is about the formation of a new radical right political group within the European Parliament. I don't know if you read it. in the Q&A box.
Yeah, I can. I to be honest, I don't have the skills and the knowledge to talk about the nitty-gritty of how the European Parliament works. To be honest, for now, I would say nothing changes in the European Parliament. Let's not forget about that. This is just it's a very important national election, but in a context that's extremely volatile. So I wouldn't be surprised one bit if by the time the next European elections come around, Brothers of Italy has actually used some of its political capital simply by spending time in government. And then I wouldn't be this sure that in Italy's extremely volatile political electoral system, yesterday's result will translate into a similar result in Brussels.
Yes, I think, Fratelli d'Italia belongs already to ECR family in the EP. I think also this will possibly lead to a balance of shift of power, let's put it that way, in the European Council. No, with ECR now representing over half of the population and more citizens than the EPP. But that being said, maybe let's pick the last question or the last two questions. If anyone will ask another one in the meantime, and this one is about one of the flagship battles of the far-right coalition, which is about immigration policies. And the question is, would this affect typically higher level fields like research or higher education?
So I do not think so. I would say that again on immigration, the far right stance is a very propagandistic one in terms of what they actually did. I'm thinking of the last time there was a far right interior minister in charge of immigration in Italy, which was Salvini in 2018, 2019. His record in government can be summarized in just a few very flashy and very harsh, I have to say, moves, preventing migrant ships from docking, and generally speaking, taking a hard stance on immigration, but not the high education, high income immigration that I guess our viewer is referring to. The general approach of this right when it comes to immigration is, as Manuela was saying, Europe has to preserve its Judeo-Christian roots, whatever that means, which means tough stance on, broadly speaking, brown Muslim immigrants, not wealthy, well-educated whites.
Thank you, Michele. Could we explain the Italian votes as a reaction to what we call as places left behind, similar to the Trump election in the US? This is an interesting question, probably there's not enough time to go through all the left behind concept, but it's an interesting question, which you also have partially answered already during this event. But if you want to say something, maybe in relation to the US, do you see any connection, maybe?
Yeah, I mean,
left behind some sectors of like the manufacturing sectors, which is
for sure. Mentioned. For sure. I mean, as I was saying, we're seeing a similar dynamic here, where the Partito Democratico, the Democrats in Italy, just like the Democrats in the US, are paying for their fling with globalization, with neoliberalism. To be fair, they did try to correct that during this campaign, in the sense that Enrico Letta's program was a fairly progressive one. He was perhaps the only one who actually listed some redistribution measures, also saying how he was going to pay for for his tax cuts and his benefits and so forth. But clearly this was not convincing enough, also keeping in mind that, now they're saying this, but the Partito Democratico was in charge of the labor ministry for a decade. So it's kind of hard to be credible when it comes to this domain. I think we haven't talked yet about the 5-star movement, which is precisely a movement that used to be very anti-political, and now it's moved more mainstream, and it campaigned almost scientifically, targeting the lower income people in the South that heavily rely on the 5 stars flagship policy, the reddito di cittadinanza, the citizenship revenue, and this gamble paid off in the sense that the 5 stars have done pretty well. They got 13% of the vote. Sorry, so they definitely managed to take away some of those like lower income votes from the PD. And apart from that, as I was saying, many other working class people, low income people are voting Brothers of Italy, just like many of those people voted for Trump in the US. If you look at at how parties are doing with different income demographics. Again, these are polls from before the election, not about how people voted yesterday. But by and large, you see the Democrats doing, in Italy, I'm saying, better and better, with wealthier and wealthier voters, and they're doing very poorly with low-income people, whereas the far right does pretty well across the board, really.
Thank you. Do you see a potential role for Berlusconi? I think we spent quite a lot of time talking about him already.
Yeah, no, let's just say that he was rumored to be looking for a place as Speaker of the Senate, which is Italy's like second most important job, at least in terms of ceremonial relevance, not necessarily in terms of political power. But let's see what happens over the next few weeks. Again, the negotiations within the coalition, to assign and allocate the various key roles will be pretty harsh, I believe. So nothing can be taken for granted at this point.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions in the Q&A box, or maybe let's take just the last one. I think you have maybe a couple of more minutes.
Yep.
Do you think the green transition agenda will keep the same level of ambition demonstrated by the Draghi's government, or you expect the short-term issues related to the crisis and SMEs needs to take over?
Again, as I was saying, let's see who the next minister is in that ministry as well. Rumor had it, but this is by no means confirmed, that the current environment minister, Cingolani, might remain in the same job. Let's see what happens. It's very hard to answer on that, in the sense that this is an aspect on which, by and large, there was not a massive disagreement between the various political forces, with the exception of nuclear energy, in the sense that the right tends to be a bit more favorable to a nuclear program, but only the last generation extremely safe, allegedly safe nuclear plants. So this is not for tomorrow. Let's see how they move. I would say, while this is not a right of climate change deniers by any means, this is not exactly, this doesn't sound like their priority as much as it is for the Green Party, for sure, but also for the Social Democrats, to be fair to them. So I would be actually cautiously pessimistic on that front this time.
on this happy note, maybe I will let you go. Thank you so much for being with us today at the European Policy Center for this event on Italy's snap elections. Yeah, where we try to wrapping up what happened yesterday when the Italians went to the polls, and the far right coalition has set a quite important victory for the country, and I think. Yeah, we'll maybe read from you more on foreign policy and elsewhere now that the government is setting up. So I look forward to reading your analysis. Thank you so much again, and thank you. Thanks for the invitation. Everyone who attended this event. Bye.